Title hook: Kunle came home 2 days early. What he walked into changed everything. Kunle Adeyemi, a hard-working oil company engineer, decides to surprise his wife, Amora, by returning early from a week-long trip to Port Harcourt. He imagines her excitement, her warm embrace. If you're new to this channel, just subscribe now, and say it in the comment section. The perfect reunion. But as his car pulls into the compound late at night, something feels off. The gateman, Sadiq, is nowhere to be found. The compound is strangely quiet, yet one light is still on in the bedroom. Kunle smiles at first. Maybe she's waiting for me. He quietly unlocks the door. Chapter 2: The moment that froze time. Title hook: What he saw in that room made his blood run cold. Kunle steps into the house, calling softly for Amora. No response. As he walks toward the bedroom, he hears whispers, then laughter. Not just Amora's voice. A man's voice. His heart begins to race. He pushes the door open and freezes. There, on his own bed, is his wife, and the gateman, Sadiq. Time stops. No shouting. No immediate reaction. Just silence, and a stare that says everything. Chapter 3: The calm before the storm. Title hook: Kunle didn't react. And that was the scariest part. Instead of exploding in anger, Kunle quietly shuts the door. Amora and Sadiq panic, scrambling, expecting rage, but Kunle simply walks out. He sits in his car for nearly an hour, staring into nothing. What are they thinking inside? Why is he so calm? Then suddenly, Kunle makes a call. Not to friends. Not to family. But to someone no one expected. Chapter 4: The unexpected twist. Title hook: What Kunle did next left everyone speechless. Within minutes, a car pulls into the compound. Out steps Chief Balogun, Amora's strict father, a man who values honor above everything. Kunle leads him silently into the house, straight to the bedroom. The door opens again. This time, there's no escape. Amora breaks down. Sadiq trembles. Chief Balogun doesn't shout. His disappointment is heavier than anger. And Kunle? Still calm. Still composed. Then he finally speaks. Chapter 5: The final decision. Title hook: Kunle's final move shocked everyone. No one saw it coming. Kunle doesn't choose violence. He doesn't fight. Instead, he makes a decision that cuts deeper than anger ever could. He hands Amora a document, divorce papers he had quietly prepared months ago after suspecting something was wrong. Then he turns to Sadiq. Take responsibility for what you started. Kunle walks out of the house for the last time, not as a broken man, but as someone who chose dignity over chaos. As dawn breaks, the compound that once held secrets is now filled with consequences. And Kunle? He drives away, free. The door didn't creak. It opened smoothly, quietly, almost too gently for the weight of what it revealed. Kunle stood at the threshold, his hand still resting on the handle, his body frozen in place as though stepping any further would shatter something invisible holding him together. For a second, his mind refused to understand what his eyes were seeing. The room was exactly as he remembered it. The neatly arranged pillows. The soft beige curtains Amora had insisted on buying despite his protests. The faint glow of the bedside lamp casting warm light across the walls. Everything was familiar. Everything except what was on the bed. Amora. And Sadiq. Their bodies tangled in a position that needed no explanation. No interpretation. No second guessing. It was clear. Brutally clear. Kunle didn't blink. Didn't move. Didn't speak. Time didn't just slow, it stopped. Amora was the first to notice him. Her laughter died instantly, like a flame snuffed out by a sudden wind. Her eyes widened, her entire body going rigid as though electricity had surged through her veins. K. Kunle, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Sadiq turned next. The moment his eyes met Kunle's, whatever color remained in his face drained completely. He scrambled backward, nearly falling off the bed in his haste, his hand shaking as he tried to grab his clothes. Sir, I. The words collapsed in his throat. Kunle said nothing. He simply stood there. Watching. Not with rage. Not with confusion. But with something far more unsettling. Stillness. A silence so deep it pressed against the walls of the room. Amora quickly pulled the bedsheet over herself, her hands trembling violently. This is not what you think, she stammered, even though her voice lacked conviction. Kunle's eyes shifted to her. Slowly. Deliberately. The look in them made her stop talking immediately. Because it wasn't anger. It wasn't heartbreak. It was recognition. Like a man finally seeing something he had suspected but never wanted confirmed. Sadiq managed to stand, though his legs looked unsteady beneath him. Sir, I swear I didn't. Kunle raised one hand slightly. Not aggressively. Just enough. Sadiq's voice died instantly. The room fell back into silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Kunle's gaze moved between them once more. He took in everything, the disheveled bed, the scattered clothes, the panic etched into their faces. Every detail. Every truth laid bare without a single word spoken. Amora's lips quivered. She tried again. Kunle, please, listen to me. But even she didn't know what she wanted him to listen to. Because there was nothing left to explain. Kunle finally moved. One step into the room. Then another. His shoes made soft sounds against the tiled floor, each step measured, controlled. Amora's breathing grew faster with each movement he made. Sadiq instinctively stepped back, as though expecting an explosion. A slap. A punch. Something. Anything. But Kunle didn't even look at him again. He stopped at the foot of the bed. Close enough now that there was no distance left to hide behind. For a brief moment, his eyes rested on the bed itself. The same bed they had shared for years. The same bed where they had laughed, argued, whispered dreams to each other in the quiet hours of the night. The same bed where Amora had once held his hand and promised, no matter what, it's you and me. Kunle inhaled slowly. Deeply. Then exhaled. Calm. Too calm. Amora noticed it. And somehow, that frightened her more than anything else. Say something, she pleaded softly, her voice breaking. Kunle looked at her again. Really looked this time. Not at the panic. Not at the tears forming in her eyes. But at her. As if trying to memorize a version of her he would never see the same way again. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. Almost gentle. How long? The question landed heavier than any shout could have. Amora froze. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. No answer came out. Sadiq looked down at the floor, unable to meet Kunle's eyes. How long? Kunle repeated. Still calm. Still steady. Amora shook her head quickly, tears now spilling freely. It's not what you think. Kunle didn't interrupt her this time. He simply watched. Waiting. But the truth had already spoken for itself. Silence filled the space again. Thick. Unforgiving. Kunle nodded once. A small, almost imperceptible movement. As if something inside him had just settled into place. Not broken. Not shattered. Just decided. He turned away. Just like that. No shouting. No accusations. No scene. Amora blinked rapidly, confused. Kunle. He didn't respond. He walked toward the door, each step as calm as the last. Sadiq looked up, clearly stunned. That was it? That was all? No confrontation? No consequences? Kunle reached the door and paused for a brief second. Not turning back. Not looking at them again. Just pausing. As though acknowledging that everything behind him had changed permanently. Then he stepped out. And quietly closed the door behind him. The soft click echoed louder than any scream. Inside the room, Amora burst into tears. What just happened? She cried, her voice shaking uncontrollably. Sadiq ran his hands over his head, pacing nervously. This is bad, this is very bad, he muttered. But neither of them understood. Not yet. Outside, Kunle stood in the hallway. Alone. The silence of the house wrapped around him once again, but it no longer felt unfamiliar. Now, it felt clear. He walked slowly back to the living room. Picked up his car keys. Ignored his travel bag completely. Then stepped outside into the night air. The cool breeze brushed against his face, but he didn't react. Didn't feel it. He walked to his car and opened the door. Sat inside. Closed it gently. For a long moment, he just sat there. Hands resting on the steering wheel. Eyes fixed on nothing. The images replayed in his mind, not chaotically, not painfully. Just steadily. Like a film he couldn't turn off. Amora's face. Sadiq's fear. The bed. The silence. Kunle inhaled again. Exhaled slowly. Still calm. Then he leaned back into the seat and stared up through the windshield at the dark sky above. No tears came. No anger followed. Just a quiet, unsettling stillness that seemed to stretch endlessly within him. From inside the house, faint sounds of movement echoed, hurried footsteps, muffled voices, panic trying to find direction. Kunle didn't turn. Didn't listen. He simply sat there. Waiting. Not for answers. Not for explanations. But for something else entirely. Something only he understood. Kunle remained in the car, unmoving, as though the world outside had ceased to exist. The engine was off, the keys resting loosely in his hand, yet he made no effort to start the vehicle. Inside the house, chaos quietly unfolded. Outside, there was only stillness. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. Time stretched into something shapeless, something that no longer followed rules. Kunle's eyes stayed fixed ahead, but he wasn't seeing the compound anymore. He was seeing memories, clear, sharp, unavoidable. Amora on their wedding day, smiling with a kind of innocence that now felt like a distant illusion. Amora dancing in the living room one random Saturday morning, laughing as she pulled him to join her. Amora insisting on choosing the curtains, arguing playfully about colors while he pretended not to care. Every moment now replayed with a different weight. Not false. Just altered. Kunle exhaled slowly, his fingers tightening slightly around the steering wheel. So this is it, he murmured under his breath. Not anger. Not pain. Just recognition. From inside the house, a door creaked open. Kunle didn't turn immediately. He already knew who it would be. Footsteps approached hesitantly. Sir. Sadiq's voice. Low. Shaky. Careful. Kunle finally turned his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge him, but not enough to fully face him. Sadiq stood a few feet away from the car, now fully dressed but visibly unsettled. His hands were clasped together, his posture uncertain, like a man standing before judgment he didn't understand. I can explain, Sadiq said, his voice trembling. Kunle looked at him properly now. And what Sadiq saw in his eyes made him wish Kunle had shouted instead. Because there was no rage there. No heat. Only a quiet, terrifying calm. Explain. Kunle repeated softly. The word hung in the air. Sadiq swallowed hard. Yes, sir, it just happened. I didn't plan. Kunle raised his hand slightly again. That same small gesture. And just like before, Sadiq fell silent immediately. Kunle studied him for a moment. Not as a boss. Not as a superior. But as a man looking at another man who had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. You're the gateman, Kunle said quietly. It wasn't a question. Sadiq nodded quickly. Yes, sir. Kunle tilted his head slightly. The one I trusted to protect this house. Sadiq's lips parted, but no words came out. Because there was nothing to say. Kunle nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. Then he looked away. Conversation over. Just like that. Sadiq stood there, confused, unsure whether to stay or leave. Sir, he tried again, desperation creeping into his tone. Kunle didn't respond. Didn't even acknowledge him this time. After a few seconds of awkward silence, Sadiq stepped back slowly. Then turned. And walked away. Back into the house. Kunle leaned his head against the seat and closed his eyes briefly. Not to escape. Just to think. Inside, Amora was pacing the living room, her entire body trembling with panic. She had thrown on a loose wrapper, her hair still slightly disheveled, her face streaked with tears. What is he doing? She muttered to herself, her voice uneven. Why is he not saying anything? Sadiq entered, his expression no better than hers. He's outside, he said. Just sitting in the car. Amora stopped pacing. Doing what? Nothing, Sadiq replied. That's the problem. She shook her head rapidly. No, this is not normal. Kunle is not like this. Her breathing quickened. He should be shouting, he should be angry, he should. But he's not, Sadiq cut in, his voice low. That silence again. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Amora wrapped her arms around herself, as though trying to hold something together inside her that was falling apart. I need to talk to him, she said suddenly. Sadiq's eyes widened slightly. Are you sure that's a good idea? Amora looked at him, almost angrily. What choice do I have? Without waiting for a response, she moved toward the door. Her steps were hesitant at first, then faster. Determined. She stepped outside into the night air. Kunle was still there. Exactly where she had left him. Sitting in the car. Still. Watching nothing. Amora approached slowly, her heart pounding loudly in her chest. Kunle, she called softly. No response. She moved closer. Kunle, please, we need to talk. Kunle turned his head slightly, his gaze meeting hers. For a moment, Amora felt her words disappear. That look again. Calm. Unreadable. Terrifying. She swallowed hard. I know what you saw, she began, her voice shaking. But it's not what you think. Kunle blinked once. Slowly. Then leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the steering wheel. What exactly do you think I saw? He asked. His tone was neutral. Flat. Amora hesitated. Because there was no safe answer to that question. It was a mistake, she said quickly. It didn't mean anything. Kunle let out a soft breath. Not a laugh. Not quite. Just air leaving his lungs. A mistake, he repeated. The word sounded different coming from him. He looked at her again. And how long has this mistake been happening? Amora froze. Her silence answered for her? Kunle nodded once more. Again, like he was confirming something already known. I was lonely, she said suddenly, desperation breaking through. You're always traveling, always away. I needed someone. I didn't plan for this to happen. Kunle listened. Quietly. Without interrupting. When she finished, the silence returned. Stronger this time. Then Kunle spoke. I see. That was all. No argument. No defense. No reaction. Amora stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. Please, Kunle, say something, shout if you want, just don't be like this. Kunle leaned back in his seat again, his gaze drifting past her. I'm tired, he said simply. The words caught her off guard. Tired, she repeated. He nodded slightly. Not of tonight, he added. Just tired. Amora felt a chill run through her. Because that didn't sound like a man reacting to betrayal. It sounded like a man who had already processed it. Already accepted it. And that was far worse. Kunle reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Amora watched him, confused. Who are you calling? She asked nervously. Kunle didn't answer immediately. He scrolled through his contacts calmly, as though this was just another ordinary moment. Then he stopped. Selected a name. And pressed the call button. Amora's heart skipped. Kunle, who are you calling? She asked again, her voice sharper this time. He placed the phone against his ear. Waited. Then spoke. Good evening, sir. Amora's breath caught. Her eyes widened as realization began to dawn. No, she whispered. Kunle's voice remained steady. Yes, sir. I'm sorry to call this late. A pause. Then. I think you need to come to my house. Amora shook her head immediately, panic rising fast. Kunle, don't. He raised his hand again, silencing her without even looking at her. Yes, sir. It's important. Another pause. I'll be waiting. Kunle ended the call and lowered the phone slowly. Amora stared at him, her entire body trembling now. You didn't, she said, her voice barely holding together. Kunle finally looked at her again. Fully. Yes, he replied calmly. And in that moment, Amora understood. Whatever was about to happen next was far beyond anything she had prepared for. The compound, once quiet and heavy with silence, now seemed to pulse with something else, anticipation. Amora stood frozen a few steps away from the car, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, as though bracing against an invisible storm. Her mind raced in all directions, searching desperately for a way to undo what had already been done. But there was no undoing this. Not anymore. Kunle, please, she said again, her voice softer now, almost fragile. You don't have to involve him, we can settle this ourselves. Kunle didn't respond. He simply sat there, calm, composed, as if he had detached himself from everything happening around him. That calmness, it unsettled her more than anything else. Because it meant one thing. He had already made up his mind. Inside the house, Sadiq hovered near the doorway, unsure whether to come out again or remain hidden. Every instinct in him screamed that this situation had gone far beyond his control. What have I done? He muttered under his breath, pacing nervously. Minutes passed slowly. Then suddenly, headlights cut through the darkness outside the gate. Amora's heart dropped instantly. No, she whispered again, shaking her head as if denial could stop what was already happening. The car pulled into the compound with authority. Smooth. Controlled. Intentional. Kunle finally stepped out of his car. He adjusted his shirt slightly, his movements neat and unhurried, as though he were preparing to receive an important guest, not expose a devastating betrayal. The engine of the arriving car went off. For a brief moment, everything was still again. Then the door opened. Out stepped Chief Balogun. Tall. Dignified. Commanding. Even in the dim compound light, his presence carried weight, the kind that didn't need volume to be felt. He was a man whose silence alone could make people uncomfortable. "Kunle," he said, his deep voice steady. "Good evening, sir," Kunle replied respectfully. No tension in his tone. No emotion. Just calm. Chief Balogun studied him for a moment, his sharp eyes scanning his face. "This better be important," he said. Kunle nodded once. "It is, sir." Amara took a step forward, her voice breaking. "Daddy." Chief Balogun raised his hand slightly without even looking at her. And just like that, she fell silent. His gaze remained fixed on Kunle. "What is going on?" he asked. Kunle gestured toward the house. "Please, sir. Come inside." No explanation. No summary. Just an invitation. Chief Balogun didn't hesitate. He began walking toward the house immediately. Kunle followed. Amara stood there for a second, completely torn. Then she rushed after them. No, this is not how this should happen," she muttered, her voice filled with panic. Inside, Sadiq stiffened the moment he saw them enter. The air in the room changed instantly. He recognized Chief Balogun. Everyone did. And the moment their eyes met, Sadiq felt his stomach drop. Chief Balogun didn't greet anyone. Didn't ask questions again. He simply stood there, taking in the room, the tension, the unspoken truth hanging thick in the air. Then he turned slightly to Kunle. "Well?" Kunle met his gaze calmly. "This way, sir." And without another word, he began walking toward the bedroom. Every step echoed louder than it should have. Amora's breathing grew faster. "Kunle, please," she begged, her voice trembling uncontrollably. "Don't do this." But he didn't stop. Didn't slow down. He reached the bedroom door. Paused. Then pushed it open. The room still carried the evidence of what had happened. Nothing had been fixed. Nothing had been hidden. The truth sat there, exposed, undeniable. Chief Balogun stepped inside. His eyes moved slowly across the room. The bed. The disarray. The atmosphere. He didn't need explanations. He didn't need words. He understood. Amara collapsed to her knees behind him. "Daddy, please," she cried, her voice breaking into pieces. Sadiq stood frozen at the doorway, unable to move, unable to speak. Kunle remained by the door, his expression unchanged. Watching. Waiting. Chief Balogun inhaled slowly. Then exhaled. His face didn't twist in anger. Didn't explode in rage. Instead, something heavier settled in his expression. Disappointment. Deep. Crushing. The kind that carried more weight than any shouting ever could. "Amara," he said quietly. She looked up at him immediately, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Daddy." Chief Balogun shook his head slowly. Not in confusion, but in disbelief. "This is what you have reduced yourself to." His voice was calm, but every word struck like a hammer. Amara sobbed harder. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Chief Balogun didn't respond to her apology. Instead, he turned his gaze toward Sadiq. "And you," he said, his tone sharper now. Sadiq straightened instantly, fear written all over his face. "Sir. I didn't mean." "Be quiet," Chief Balogun cut in. Sadiq's mouth snapped shut immediately. The room fell silent again. Heavy. Unforgiving. Then Chief Balogun turned back to Kunle. For the first time since arriving, there was something different in his eyes. Respect. mixed with curiosity. "You called me," he said. "Why?" Kunle stepped forward slightly. His posture remained straight. His voice steady. "Because, sir, this concerns your daughter." Chief Balogun held his gaze. "And?" Kunle didn't rush his words. Didn't fill the silence unnecessarily. When something like this happens, he continued calmly, it should not be hidden. Amora shook her head violently. "Kunle, please." But no one was listening to her anymore. Chief Balogun's eyes narrowed slightly. "And what exactly do you intend to do?" he asked. That question hung in the air. Because now? Everything depended on Kunle's answer. Sadiq held his breath. Amora's tears slowed, replaced by fear of the unknown. Chief Balogun stood firm, waiting. Kunle looked at each of them briefly. Then back at Chief Balogun. And for the first time since the night began, a faint shift appeared in his expression. Not anger. Not pain. But resolution. "I've already decided, sir," he said quietly. The room seemed to tighten around those words. Because whatever came next was final. The room felt smaller somehow, as though the walls had inched closer to witness the outcome of a moment none of them could escape. Kunle stood calmly, his eyes steady, his posture unchanged. The weight of everything that had happened rested in the silence between them, but it did not bend him. Chief Balogun watched him closely. Amora remained on her knees, her tears now quiet, her breathing uneven. Sadiq stood near the door, rigid, like a man awaiting judgment he knew he deserved. "I've already decided, sir," Kunle repeated. Chief Balogun gave a slow nod. "Then speak." Kunle reached into his jacket pocket. The movement was simple, unhurried, but it immediately drew everyone's attention. Amora's eyes followed his hand. Something about that gesture made her chest tighten. Kunle pulled out a neatly folded document. Not crumpled. Not rushed. Prepared. He held it for a moment, glancing down at it briefly before looking back up. Then he stepped forward and extended it toward Amora. Her hands trembled as she reached out slowly, unsure of what she was about to receive, but already afraid of it. "What is this?" she whispered. Kunle didn't answer immediately. He waited until she fully took the document. Only then did he speak. "Open it." The words were calm. Gentle, even. But they carried finality. Amora hesitated. Her fingers shook as she unfolded the paper. Her eye scanned the first line. And instantly, her breath caught. Her entire body went still. "No," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible. She read it again, as though hoping she had misunderstood. But the words did not change. They remained exactly what they were. Divorce papers. Already prepared. Already signed. The room shifted. Not physically, but emotionally. Because in that moment, everything became clear. This wasn't a reaction. This wasn't anger. This wasn't something Kunle had just decided minutes ago. This had been coming. Amora looked up at him slowly, her face pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. You already?" Kunle nodded once. "Yes." That single word hit harder than anything else he could have said. Tears began to fall again, but this time, they carried a different weight. Not just guilt. Not just fear. But realization. "You planned this?" she asked, her voice breaking completely now. Kunle shook his head slightly. "I prepared for the possibility," he corrected calmly. Amora let out a soft, shattered sound, somewhere between a sob and a laugh. "So you knew?" Kunle's gaze didn't waver. "I didn't know," he said. "But I stopped being sure." Silence followed. Because that truth was undeniable. Chief Balogun exhaled slowly, his expression unreadable, though the tension in his jaw spoke volumes. He turned slightly away, processing what he had just witnessed, not just the betrayal, but the response to it. Sadiq shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between Kunle and the document in Amora's hands. The situation had taken a turn he hadn't expected. There was no shouting. No chaos. Just consequence. Kunle took a step closer. Not aggressive. Not confrontational. Just deliberate. Sign it, he said quietly. Amora shook her head immediately. No, Kunle, please, we can fix this. Her voice rose slightly, desperation spilling through. It was a mistake. I swear, it won't happen again. Kunle listened. As he had done all night. Without interruption. Without reaction. Then he spoke. You didn't make one mistake, he said calmly. You made a series of choices. The words cut cleanly. No anger. No insult. Just truth. Amora's shoulders shook as she cried. I was lonely, she whispered again, clinging to the only explanation she had left. Kunle nodded slightly. I know. That response caught her off guard. For a brief moment, she looked up at him with confusion. Because there was no argument in his tone. No rejection of her feelings. Just acknowledgement. But that didn't change anything. And I was busy, Kunle continued. I accept that too. Amora's tears slowed, her eyes searching his face. Hope flickered faintly. But it didn't last. But being lonely, Kunle added, is not the same as being disloyal. The hope disappeared instantly. The room fell silent again. Chief Balogun closed his eyes briefly, as though those words had struck him as well. Amora looked back down at the document in her hands. Her grip tightened around it. I can't, she whispered. Kunle didn't respond immediately. He simply watched her. Then he turned. Not toward her, but toward Sadiq. For the first time since stepping into the room, Kunle faced him fully. Sadiq straightened instantly, fear rising again in his chest. Sir, he said cautiously. Kunle held his gaze. And spoke. Take responsibility for what you started. The words landed heavily. Sadiq blinked rapidly, confused. Sir. I don't understand. Kunle didn't move. Didn't soften his expression. You were not invited into this marriage, he said calmly. But you entered it anyway. Sadiq swallowed hard. So now, you don't get to walk away like nothing happened. The implication settled slowly. Then all at once. Sadiq's eyes widened slightly. You mean? Kunle didn't repeat himself. He didn't need to. Amora looked up sharply, panic flooding her face again. No, that's not. But her voice faded. Because even she understood what this meant. Chief Balogun opened his eyes and looked at Kunle again. This time, there was no curiosity left. Only recognition. Kunle wasn't reacting emotionally. He was concluding something. Decisively. Without chaos. Without noise. Kunle stepped back slightly, creating distance between himself and the rest of them. I won't fight, he said quietly. I won't shout. And I won't destroy myself over this. His voice remained steady. Controlled. I'm choosing something else. Amora's tears fell silently now. Because she finally understood. This wasn't punishment. This wasn't revenge. This was release. Kunle looked at her one last time. Not with anger. Not with love. But with something in between. Something final. When you're ready, he said, gesturing lightly to the document, sign it. No pressure. No force. Just inevitability. Then he turned toward the door. Sadiq instinctively stepped aside. Chief Balagan remained still, watching him go. Kunle reached the doorway. Paused briefly. Then walked out. Just like that. No hesitation. No looking back. Outside, the first hint of dawn was beginning to creep into the sky. A faint light replacing the darkness that had covered everything just hours before. Kunle stepped into the compound, inhaling the cool morning air. For the first time that night, he felt something shift inside him. Not relief. Not happiness. But clarity. He walked to his car, opened the door, and got in. This time, he didn't sit still. He started the engine. The sound broke through the silence of the morning. Inside the house, no one moved. No one spoke. Because everything that needed to be said already had been. Kunle placed his hands on the steering wheel. Looked straight ahead. Then drove out of the compound. Not as a man running away, but as a man who had chosen to leave. And as the gate slowly closed behind him, the life he once knew closed with it.